Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo! I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 79 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by now three-time guest of the show, friend of the pod, very unserious, Khobi Price of the Southern California News Group. Khobi, how you doing today?
I'm good. Now, real question. How many people have been three-time guests besides me?
I think it's just Sam.
Just Sam?
I think it's just Sam Amick, yeah. So
I'm honored. This is a big honor.
We did miss episode 69, which I let the people know you had wanted to be on, and we had Alan Sliwa on instead. But 79, 10 more, it's a bigger number, I guess. So we're already off the rails, and we're not even a minute into this episode. I'm unserious because I just broke my Wi-Fi, which is a story for another day. I'm currently recording on my hotspot. But a team that was not unserious, at least for one night or a half, was the LA Lakers, who are coming off of one of their best wins of the season. They had a 14-point comeback against the Miami Heat. They were down by 12 in the first half. Miami was hitting everything, and the Lakers could have done what they've done 6, 7, 8 times throughout the season in terms of rolling over in the second half and losing a game by 20, 25, 30 plus points. But instead, they held on to the rope. They pulled it, and the Miami Heat were the ones who let go of it and ended up folding in the second half as LA made their comeback. So I talked about this last night. I felt like it was a really big win from a spirit perspective for this group, coming off of 3 straight losses, some deflating losses, particularly the Dallas and San Antonio games, also dealing with the LA fires and that whole situation. It felt like things were kind of teetering there, where if they had lost this game, especially the way that the first half was looking, it could have been a bit costly for this group. And with the trade deadline now about 3 weeks away, certainly the front office is going to be monitoring the team's performance and where they are in the standings and all this stuff. So what did you make of last night's win, how big it was, and where are you currently at with this group now that we're 7 games in post-DFS trade?
Yeah, last night was a pretty big win. Kind of lost in, obviously, especially because of the fires and the postponements, and obviously like things much bigger than basketball going on. It'd been a while since they had a win. It was a 3-game losing streak, which typically in a typical NBA season is not even a week. Like, it may be 3 losses across maybe 5-6 days. Their last win before last night was the January 3rd win over the Atlanta Hawks, I believe. I think that was it was Blazers then Hawks, Blazers then Hawks back-to-back. Yeah. So it had been almost, a week and a half since their last victory. And then obviously you have the 2 losses to Houston, Dallas, postponements, then the loss to San Antonio. So it had just been a while since those guys could go back to the locker room. JJ Redick and his coaching staff could go back to their rooms and just celebrate a win. And after everything that this team has been through, everything this city has been through, or this area has been through, region has been through over the past week plus, it just had to, I would imagine for them, and even someone that spoke on it, probably just felt good just to get a victory. As for state of the team, I'm sure we're going to get to this even more. My feelings on the team haven't really changed much, I guess, over the past week or so. Since making the trade for DFS and Shake Notes, and they're 3-4, right? So, and one of those losses is to a team they're playing right now, the Cleveland Cavaliers, who just looks like they could possibly just be the best team in the league, or they're up there amongst 3 teams. You could say these 3 are the best teams in the league. So they've been there up. They've had, in that 7-game stretch, they've had some really impressive performances. I still say that win against the Hawks was one of their better performances of the season, along with a few in the first week of the season, along with that win against Memphis. I think it was mid-December. That win over the Hawks was just a really impressive win. But then they've had some letdowns, like both the losses in Texas, especially the Dallas.
I've been calling it the Texas Massacre because they lost to all three teams.
The Texas Massacre. Yes, that's good. Yeah. Someone, I forget, maybe it was you who pointed out how it was just 3 consecutive losses in a row to Texas teams. So, yeah, it's kind of like, it's kind of been where I'm at now is where I've been at this entire season. They've been like very, the lows have been felt like really low, and then the highs, I'm not going to say they've been super high because we've talked about this. They're lacking those like quote unquote signature wins. I think that win over Memphis was probably their best win of the season. You can throw in the early Timberwolves, early Phoenix wins. I was actually I know they've had their own ups and downs. I was actually really impressed by the manner in which they beat the Kings both times in Sacramento. But they've lacked a true just, this is a win that shows you they could contend with any team. I mean, the Memphis win should be that. But for some reason, coming out of that just hasn't felt like it since. So I'm still in this spot of, I think they're a good team. I just don't know if they're a contender.
Yeah, to that point, I'm looking at it now. They are 10-14 against teams 500 and above. They are 11-3 against teams below 500, and specifically against the top 5 teams in the West: OKC, Houston, Memphis, Denver, and the Clippers in that order. They are just 1-5 against those 5 teams. They have yet to play the Clippers. They will be playing them this weekend, and we'll see how that game goes. First time they've been the road team against the Clippers in a separate building in quite a while. But let's get into some of the recent stuff with the team. I think that the most interesting thing that came out of today's practice was the too big look that JJ Redick talked about. So he goes to the too big look to close the third quarter. He adjusts the second half rotation after he goes with that lineup that I cannot explain with Jackson, LeBron, Dalton, Shake, and Gabe. It was the first time I've called out a JJ lineup on Twitter/X, whatever you want to refer to it as. I just didn't get it. I understood benching Cam because I was advocating for benching Cam, but Shake was clearly not it. And those minutes were a disaster, and that stretch was pretty rough. But JJ learned it adjusted at halftime and went with some Jackson AD minutes, and then brought in LeBron and just went with a bigger front court, something that he had been reluctant to do and had recently been asked by Mike Trudell about the too big looks. And he said he just didn't really think it worked. At the time, it was about Christian Coloco potentially playing with AD, and he said he wasn't considering that and preferred playing smaller. But he has since changed tune, and he went to that last night. Today at practice, it was just brought up unprompted that he wants to start using too big looks a little bit more, especially now that they added Trey Jemison from Pelicans on a 2-way contract. So quickly, what are your thoughts on adding Trey, and what are your thoughts on them potentially going to too big looks moving forward? At least, to be clear, he said in small doses, I believe, or small stretches, something like that. So he's like, we still might go small. So I want to temper. I know a lot of fans want them to play too big looks, so I want to temper expectations. But what do you think of the Trey addition, and just in general them playing too big looks a little more?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of Trey. I mean, he's shown to be like a pretty impressive big man. I mean, considering his role, he's what? I think he's like 6'10", 260, big,
He's
like
big,
energetic.
Big guy, yeah.
Big guy. I mean, it's something that honestly, like, this team has lacked. I mean, he seems like the kind of big man who just bring that physicality and just bring an energy that, at certain points, let's be fair. Like, Jackson is coming off, like, he was out for 15 consecutive games. I think 20 or 21 of 22, something along those lines.
Yeah,
just a lot
I think
of
it was
time
20 of 21. Yeah.
So he's, even JJ acknowledged, like, after his injuries, they have to monitor his stuff. So, but like, even since Jackson's been back, outside of yesterday, like, it's just been so up and down with him. It seems like they could use another big man who can play alongside AD, who can be the backup big on their own, or just get minutes on their own as a big man. So I I think it's a good idea, especially on a two-way contract where, I mean, obviously they don't have another full-time roster spot or standard roster spot, so it had to be on a two-way. But I like the idea. I think he could be very useful for them. I'm curious to see just how they balance this all between, having Christian Coloco, having Trey, and now having Jackson, all, in theory, all available. Maybe it's, we didn't really get into it today, but maybe it's one of Coloco and one of Trey are available, depending on the game, just so they're not going up against their games played limit or games available limit. That comes with being a two-way contract. So I like the addition. As for the two big looks, I know a lot of people have been clamoring for them. They weren't. I understand why JJ went away from them, because at least with AD and Jackson, they weren't really performing too well. The Lakers were getting beat pretty handily in those minutes. So, granted, it was at the time, especially it's a small sample size. I was looking back at it. I don't think that AD and Jackson had been on the floor together before last night, since the game that Jackson got hurt in Phoenix on November 26th, I want to say. So it had been a while. That was almost like a different iteration of the team anyway. And again, it was also still very limited minutes leading into that game. So as I'm, being open-minded is good. It's helpful. This team obviously has problems defensively that they need to solve, need to figure out. So if they, if JJ and his coaching staff believe two big looks in small doses, that's the key phrasing or the key words, in small doses can be a solution. I think it's worth a shot. Going for last night, it was a almost 3-minute stretch. Whether it's a 3-4 minute stretch of just having AD and Jackson on the floor together, or Trey and AD, or I doubt we get much Trey and Jackson or Christian and Jackson, but any AD plus another big man like that, to me, that's worth exploring, especially when, your small ball lineups, to me, haven't been working well either. And you need, I think for this team, especially with their deficiencies, I think, having guys scaled back. So having another big, so AD can play the 4, and then, LeBron and Rui can play the 3, or DFS can play the 3. I think that's healthier for the overall ecosystem of the team.
There was a play last night where they blitzed with Jackson against Hero, and you see AD as the low man looming in the paint, and Hero ends up turning the ball over. And it's like, that's the advantage of playing two bigs, especially when you have a mobile big defensively the way that Jackson Hayes is. And it's different when you have a 6'11", 7-footer like him, who can move his feet well on the perimeter for a guy that size, and he's blitzing and being disruptive, versus trying to do that even with a Rui, a DFS, or anyone smaller than that. And you just saw the impact of, it was only, I think it wasn't even 3 minutes. It was like just under 3 minutes, but in that time frame, you saw the impact. And even attacking the zone, I thought like Jackson had that one lob from LeBron, and just made sense. And I would like to see it more in general, at least a shift a game, if not a couple of shifts. And it could still be 2 to 4 minute shifts where it's not very long, but you're at least giving it a look in maybe the middle to late portions of the first and third quarters. I immediately have 3 thoughts coming out of it, though, and maybe a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, or kind of always looking for like what's the real angle here. But one, I wonder if this says anything about Christian Wood's availability. It seems like Jared Vanderbilt is trending toward them having some type of update next week, and him potentially being back within the next week and a half, 2 weeks or so. So I'm not going to include Vando in that, but we have not heard anything about Christian Wood in quite a while. So it makes me wonder, is this potentially a move, at least in the short term, to shore up the big man depth, with Christian Wood potentially out for however long he's going to be out? 2, is this a test run for the trade deadline, and LA potentially acquiring another big man who will surpass Jackson, Christian, and Trey in the pecking order, and be a backup 5, and potentially even start next to AD? I mean, they could, depending on who the player is, what path they go down. And is this kind of a test run over the next few weeks of seeing okay, if we do a little bit more two big looks, like what does this look like? Who are the three best players to complement AD and Big X? The third one for me, and this is the one I'm hoping it is not, if I'm the Lakers, is that like this is the move that they're like, we're not going to be investing in the center position. We're going to stand pat and keep things as they are in terms of the big man group. And this, like, we think Trey and Christian Coloco and Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood, like they all kind of have differing skill sets. So depending on the night, depending on the matchup, we can rotate these guys and get by with it. I would hope it's not that one, but if it's either of the other two, like it makes sense then if one of your guys is out, replace Christian Wood. And it also makes sense if you're trying to acquire another big, do a little bit of a test run, see how that looks, get the group more familiar with it. But if it's the latter, I don't like that as much, because I still think that this continues to be a clear weakness with this group in terms of needing a better and more consistent backup five. And I'm not saying necessarily go trade both first round picks for like a Walker Kessler or a bigger move like that, although I am high on Kessler and his fit in LA. But I also think standing pat and not really addressing this when the Jackson minutes have been pretty rough outside of last night. And then there were stretches where they've just gone centerless. And like, I feel like that's still a pretty clear need, in my opinion, for this group moving forward.
The lights went off and on during your your explanation. That was incredible.
Such a spicy take that
such a spicy take that they turn the lights off with it. That was incredible. Yeah, I mean, so it's funny because we didn't dive too deep into it, just want to save for the pod, but we actually spoke about, I think it was your second point about this possibly being a potential playing more two big lines to see how it could potentially look. If there are certain big men that they're targeting at the trade deadline, or if not whether there are certain big men they're targeting ahead of the trade deadline, if they want to just see, provide a larger sample to see, okay, this is how AD looks next to another big. Obviously, there are you could go in a variety of directions of the style of big man. If it's a mobile big like Jackson, or more of a paint bound big like I guess Trey in theory, or more of a stretch big, or Trey and Coloco, or more of a stretch big like Christian Wood. Like seeing who, as you mentioned, we still don't have. We have more updates on Jared Vanderbilt than we do of Christian Wood at this point. So that's something that immediately, like as we were speaking with JJ, that came to mind. The former point about Christian Wood is, I mean, what's the day? We're talking about January 16th. We're almost at the midway point of the season. I think tomorrow's going to be game 39. I mean, also at a certain point, at least with Christian Wood, just what would his role be on the team? Where would he fit in the rotation? This team's kind of taken, a life of its, like this team is kind of how it is right now. So even if he does come back at some point this season, or I would be more secure just where he would fit in. But I like the conspiracies. I'm a big fan of conspiracy theorists, Jovan. The last point would be, I would be like the most. It would be the most confusing or confounding one, just because two-way guys are two-way guys for a reason, and that's not a slight on them. And it's also, you just can't play them in the playoffs. Like that's just a hard and fast. That's just a rule. So if you're trying to improve your rotation, like in theory, your playoff rotation, signing two-way guys doesn't do anything for you. So. But yeah, I like the conspiracy theories. I was with you on one. We're 1 for 3. If this were baseball,
one of the three, okay.
Yeah, we.
So I'm like a Lakers 3-point shooter out there. I'm 1 for 3.
You said it, not me. I want everyone to know. Jovan said that, not me. I'm simply a guest. This show does not have my name on it.
This is off the rails. Another thing that JJ talked about at practice today that I found interesting, and we got into a dialogue. You and I after practice, was the switching, and it was the final question of his practice availability, and he was asked about switching and just the philosophy behind it, and why some games he has decided to switch 1 through 5, why some games he switches less, and just what his reasoning is. And JJ essentially said that If you go and look over the course of the season, they tried it in that Cleveland game early on. They got shredded. They lost that game by, I think it was like 30 points or whatever. And he went away from it for, he said, about 15 games. Tried it again against San Antonio in that game, the second San Antonio matchup in San Antonio, and it was successful. That was a game where Max Christie was back in the rotation, and he was doing a really good job fronting Victor Wembanyama on switches, and it was a very active, good defensive game for the Lakers. I said they tried it for about, I think, 4 of the next 5 games, had some success against like OKC with it, but also that led into that road trip where they had the Miami loss, the Minnesota loss, and just the season started to look like it was going off the rails, similar to this episode. And you and I got, and then he said that in general, like their base coverage is 1 through 4 switching, which he said over half the league. That's the typical base defense, unless you have ducks in your rotation, which are basically guys you are trying to hide in switches and guys you don't want exposed and switching onto other players. And I made the argument to you that I think the Lakers have some ducks in their rotation, and not quite, not necessarily like full on ducks. I think really the only guy I'd look at as like a full on duck would probably be Dalton. But aside from him, I think the Lakers need to be more judicious with their switching. And for me, it's not like, I think the 1 through 5 has probably worked less than it has worked. And that's where I'm more just against that theory or that theoretical game plan. They tend to use it against San Antonio, but like there's also, they use it against Dallas. I don't think it worked. So I'm against that in general, but like bigger picture, I even think the 1 through 4, I just think it allows teams to really target certain guys. And I think I think the dialogue around this has become like just more about switching in general. And I think JJ has kind of defended it by saying like, well, look, it's really only this handful of games where we switch 1 through 5. But I think a lot of the Lakers defensive breakdowns just come within their switching in general and within some of the limitations of some of their defensive personnel, particularly I think part of the starting group together, where if I'm looking at like this roster and I'm going more personnel based, I probably only want Austin switching between guards. And maybe there are some small forwards where I'm okay. And that's probably a matchup based thing night to night. But I do not want Austin switching onto big men. I really don't want Max switching onto big men either. I know he did a good job against Wemby and he has done a good job fronting. But in general, if I can avoid that, I'd rather not have Max switching onto bigs. If you could switch 1 through 3, that's fine. Rui, I don't want switching on to smaller guys. So Rui, I'd want to switch 3 through 5. LeBron 3 through 5, AD 3 through 5. And then with the bench, Gabe, either guard spot, maybe some threes. I know he's actually done a decent job guarding up. Dalton, I want to be very selective with who I switch him onto. Cam, either wing spot. I don't think he does a good job battling bigs. Just going down the list here, like Vando, of course, can probably switch 1 through 4, 1 through 5, but that's more of an exception than the norm. And I actually would disagree. Like he said, the teams that don't tend to switch as much have guys in the rotation basically that you don't want switching. And I would argue that the Lakers actually have several guys that you don't want switching across multiple positions. You kind of disagreed. I don't want to put words in your mouth. So how do you view that? And what's your assessment overall of their switching? And let's put the 1 through 5 aside, because I think we've kind of seen the results of that, but just the 1 through 4 switching and some of the guards, especially switching up onto bigger guys.
Well, I think so. I especially rewatching the most recent San Antonio game. I understand the issues conceptually and theoretically with just them switching, period. I mean, a lot of times they're just giving up mismatches. So that's always, and then they don't, I mean, especially with the starting group, but just overall, they lack the defensive rebounding, tenacity, like whatever you want to say. Like, obviously they have, like, Anthony Davis is a top tier defensive rebounder. LeBron, when he's locked in, will be a top tier defensive, will be a high end defensive rebounder. Max has been, his rebounding has been up and down at certain points. Outside of that, I mean, we've talked about this. The rebounding has come and gone with this group. But that aside, I mean, I think I've just had more of an issue, like, especially in the San Antonio game, just like the technique and execution of switching. I mean, there would be times where guys would be too low when they switch. So the offensive player who's, either driving or about to pull up, they just have too much space. And now they're either pulling up or they're just driving into your chest. And, driving into your chest against Austin and Max, who, for as much as, Max has, good hands and good, good length and, it can move. He's not necessarily the strongest player, just in terms of is how you defend, and same with Austin. Like there's just certain technique things that weren't working well. Now, obviously, if you're gonna, if you have a bigger player, I mean, there was a couple times where Wemby had Austin on him, and he was just getting easy shots at the rim. So I understand where the complaints about switching comes from with this group, because I agree they don't have the best defensive personnel for a more switchy unit, especially when they aren't playing Dorian Finney-Smith or Jared Vanderbilt, or at least having, to me, their switches players are, Anthony Davis at the top of the list for sure. But then after that is like Dorian Finney-Smith. I think LeBron actually,
but he's engaged. Yeah.
So the funny thing is, like, we saw this yesterday in the Miami game, he switched onto Tyler Hero at one point, and he just, Tyler wasn't creating a separation. He wasn't getting a good look. Like, the thing about LeBron is that he will still be locked in an ISO one-on-one defensive situation. Now, where he gets sometimes in trouble is the help defense.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of just, he can still guard up and down the 1 through 5. It's just more so the help. But, go back to the point, AD, Dorian Finney-Smith, LeBron. I think Rui, I don't want him guarding smaller guards, but I think he's shown that he can guard across the positional spectrum when he's also engaged. I think I see a little bit more, I guess, potential for switching within the group than maybe you do. But I just think a lot of their techniques and communication within the switching, I think that's more so the problem. But I think that's also, I think
that's inherent to the group, though, right? Like that's part of who they are.
That's part of who they are. So regardless, any defensive scheme, you're going to need some level of buy-in and communication. And I think that's why, their switching was so good the first time, or not the first time, but when they brought it back in that first San Antonio game, it was so good because they were so locked in on it. And I feel like this has also been part of their issue as a group. Whenever they switch defensive schemes or whenever they switch starting lineups, it's usually so good at the start. And then once they get a few games into it, the attention to detail falls off, they're not as locked in. I think that's more of we're looking so much at the results of it. I think some more, I guess you want to call it the symptom, is that the more this group kind of does something, especially at least defensively, because of the, you said it better than I just could, they just have inherent issues. That kind of it shows itself the bigger the sample grows. So that's where, for me, I don't like the switching. They do have limitations, and I want to acknowledge them. However, their biggest limitation is, to me, they don't always their execution will just fall off, regardless if it's switching, if it's coverage. It's just help side, weak side defense. It'll just fall off, and then they'll pick it up for a game or two, or for a nice stretch, and then they get, I don't know if it's you want to use the word lackadaisical. Attention to detail's not there, but to me, that's more so the issue. And it shows because I will say with switching, you need to be a little bit more engaged. And I felt like during that segment when they first started switching in late November going to December, it was almost forcing them to be more engaged. And then they did it. And then they stopped being as engaged. Then they went to coverage and it worked. And then they lost that engagement. And then it was more matchup specific, all right, let's switch a little bit. So I think that's more so, I guess, where I'm coming from with it.
I think that's a really good point. And I think, to what you just said, it might not matter what they run, that it kind of combining our points, they kind of inherently are a group that lets go of the rope for stretches. And it feels like they have one of these serious performances. We were talking about it earlier today. Like, I feel like if every 5 to 7 games, they have like a serious performance. And then the other 4 to 6 games are a combination of either them like physically overwhelming or just like out talenting a team, or maybe they have like a nice shot making game, or they're playing a team that's just like better than them, out executes them, like a more serious team, and then they lose those games. And then they'll show the one flash of the Miami game or that San Antonio game or the Memphis game. Like, there's been these games that we can kind of pick off in terms of a serious performance and them really rising to the occasion and fighting back and facing adversity and being resilient. But there's also plenty of times where they've rolled over. And I think of the Denver game, the Phoenix game, the Minnesota game, the Miami game, and the Dallas game, the San Antonio game again. Like, so it's just, I can list as many games they've given up as impressive games as they've had, in my opinion. And that is where this team is just so confounding. And then I've been calling them recently a week to week team. And it feels like we'll see what, like, the next week could be promising because they got Brooklyn, they got the Clippers, they got Washington. Like, maybe that's a stretch they can go. They should go at least 2-1, if not. They have the possibility to go 3-0. Then they play Boston. Then they go on the Grammy trip, and that's going to be a much more difficult stretch. But we've kind of touched on some of the stuff in terms of needs and the roster and where things are at post DFS. But we're 3 weeks directly or exactly away from the February 6th trade deadline. So Lakers have 21 days to potentially get Jared Vanderbilt back, potentially get Christian Wood back, evaluate the roster, see where they are in the standings, and then make an assessment as to what's our greatest need and what are we willing to give up for it. Where you stand, or where this team is at currently, where are you with what their biggest need, or you could rank if you think there are multiple, and what type of player would you be trying to target, and what would you ultimately be willing to give up to address that need?
I mean, the biggest need, I keep going back and forth between another big man, which now is, at this point, they have two big men as the two-way guys. And then they have a backup big in Jackson Hayes, and then Christian Wood, it's a big man who hasn't been available. But I want to fortify that spot, and then
they're kind of all bigs and guards.
Yeah, well. So the interesting thing is, like, they're all bigs and guards, but then they just added a forward. I don't know if I would call Dorian Finney-Smith a wing. He's definitely more of like a forward to me. Like, he's more of a 3-4.
He's more of a 4. Yeah,
more
of a 4 than a 3.
Yeah, and he's definitely not. He's not playing 2, so I wouldn't consider him like a wing because I consider wings more like 2-3s, maybe a 2-4. But like they have. He was in rotation, the first half rotation, but between the guards they have Shake, Gabe, who's picked up his play as of late.
Mm-hmm.
The shot making has been there, the playmaking not so much, and that's kind of like why I'm almost want to put the number 2. Number 1 would be like fortifying another big man, whether it's a backup big, a starting big next to just another big man who I feel like can be relied on a night-to-night basis a little bit more. Another offensive playmaker. Again, it could be a player who starts alongside Austin or starts who comes off the. In theory, is probably going to be a player who comes off the bench just because I think there's a good. In theory, you want to add if you can add more talent, a better player, you do, and that player would start. But I think there is a good flow with this starting unit, even though it hasn't. I guess the record hasn't been the best up to this point. The idea of it is there. I think. Yeah. It's only been so many. Yeah, it's only been so many games as well, and as like we talked about, a few of those games they just let go of the rope. So I think that's also impacting their net rate, their record, their net rating. But yeah, I think like a backcourt playmaker, that would be my number 2. You can always add more wings, but if in theory, again, this is theory, Jared Vanderbilt hasn't played in almost a year. I think we're 2 weeks away from it being a year since he got hurt. But in theory, if you have a quote unquote wing rotation of LeBron, Rui, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Jarrett Vanderbilt, like you don't need all. Like LeBron's going to be LeBron in the playoffs. That's just what he's done. If you have Dorian Finney-Smith, Rui Hachimura, and Jarrett Vanderbilt, that feels like it. Like some combination of those three should be enough in the playoffs. That's just where I stand. So that's why I put like another wing as maybe like the last need, another two-way wing, but because everybody's looking for a two-way wing. So that's also like the challenging part. I mean, you can never have too many two-way wings. You just can't. But I think for me, the backup big, backcourt playmaker, and then a two-way wing, just because, I mean, why not?
We're similar. So I have a wing actually number 1 on my ranking. And I look at it, I mean, depending on who it is, how much money they make will determine ultimately like which player you have to give up. But I think if I'm projecting out what I like the ideal version of this team, in my opinion, it's DFS in for Rui, and you're starting AD, LeBron, DFS, Max, and Austin, and your 4 key bench guys are Jared Vanderbilt, another athletic wing, probably a slight like someone in the 6'5" to 6'7" range. Doesn't necessarily need to be, because Vando's going to take the bigger wing role. So a guy who could defend 2s and 3s, basically. That's your other wing guy, a backcourt playmaker, ball handler. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a high level guy who can even run the offense. But right now, I do think, like, who's their third best ball handler? It might be AD. I guess it's like AD or Gabe, but I think that's a pretty big drop off from LeBron and Austin to whoever that third guy is. And I still think running the offense through LeBron and Austin is fine. We've seen some really good results with that. Last night, Austin had 14 points and 1 assist. LeBron had, 14 assists and 1 turnover. Excuse me. And LeBron had 9 assists, and they were dissecting the variations of Miami's zones. And I think that's like, there are going to be matchups where those guys struggle, but I think ultimately you're fine. Like we've seen the playoff offense run through LeBron and Austin, and it's been pretty good with the exception of going up against Denver. But I still would rather have like a just better like secondary playmaker, ball handler, initiator there. So that would be my 8th guy in my rotation. And the 9th guy would be a better backup big that's better than Jackson Hayes, better than Christian Wood, better than Christian Coloco. So 3 of those guys in my projected ideal rotation are not on the roster. And if you noticed, I did not mention Rui Hachimura or Gabe Vincent. I think those are 2 guys that I would be open to trading and using left draft capital to go acquire that other wing and go acquire that big. And then you also have some minimum guys that potentially you could use to go get like a cheap one of those, probably either the guard or the big man, go get a cheaper one and then use the other 2 guys to get like a more expensive player or couple of players. So that's kind of where I'm at. Now, if you could Gabe maybe be that guy, as we have seen some better offensive performances. We've seen him look more comfortable when he plays more, when he has the ball in his hands. Like maybe then that kind of leaves Rui as the odd man out. But I wonder about the like idealized version of this team. And I feel like Max, Vando, and DFS with their collective defense and versatility and switchability, those are traits that I think will translate well to the playoffs. With all of them, there's going to be questions about their shot, especially with Vando. But I feel like you can see those types of guys working really well around Austin, LeBron, and AD. Rui, I have some concerns because we've seen what the floor of his off-ball defense, his rebounding, the passivity offensively outside of just like wide open threes. Like he could have a night like he did against the Heat, but then he could also have nights like the previous 3 or 4 games. So it's like, I just feel like his floor is pretty low. And that's probably the guy I'd ultimately be willing to part with. In terms of potentially moving Rui or Gabe and how those guys fit into like the playoff rotation, how do you feel about those two?
So I was actually going to ask you this too, because this has been one of my biggest hesitations, specifically when it comes to Rui. And I know I recognize like the value they bring to the team is different, so I don't want to act like they bring the same value. But Vando's uncertain, like just the nature of the last basically year with him, and honestly, like longer than year because he only played 29 games last season. Like he missed
It's
the
been
first
almost 2
20 games of
years.
last. Yeah, it's been. I mean, he hasn't been right since the conference finals essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially
May 2023. So that's we're going on 20 months.
So because of the nature of that, like it makes me more hesitant to trade Rui because in theory, like I can't think of a player off the top of my head. Maybe you can while I'm speaking if you already have a Rui trade in mind. I'm sure you do. But
the one I like is Bruce Brown.
Okay, so
and I think Bruce Brown is an interesting one because he checks. So the two guys I that have grown on me throughout this process as I've observed the team, thought about what they need, are Bruce Brown and Lonzo Ball. They both come with notable injury risk, and I want to acknowledge that up front. With Bruce Brown, there's also the shooting situation of just he's been a very inconsistent shooter throughout his career. However, I think the version that we saw in Denver, I don't know if that version is still there, and there's certainly a risk it's not. I think he and Lonzo can both potentially check two boxes in terms of being that third ball handler playmaker. Lonzo more than Bruce, but Bruce did play some backup point guard in Denver during that title run. And then also those guys defending up and being able to defend basically 1 through 3. Or in Bruce's case, I'd probably say 2 and 3, maybe some 4s, because he can guard up. With Lonzo, more like 1 through 3. And that's where I like those moves because they potentially check a couple boxes, and then you just have to go get another big, and you could potentially even do that within one trade. But those are the two guys that come to mind. Otherwise, it's like, is it a Josh Green or like there aren't many wings available. So Cam Johnson's going to cost you 2 first-round picks. They already made a trade with Brooklyn. I don't see that happening. Brandon Ingram, it's really hard to salary match. Jimmy Butler, it's even harder to salary match. And there's a question of like what those guys' values are. Zach LaVine, tough to salary match. I think is a tough fit with Austin, is a defensive liability. There's a lot of questions there in terms of fit. So looking at like who's realistically out there, I think Bruce Brown and Lonzo can both potentially check wing and perimeter defense and some ball handling, playmaking juice. Do you like either one of those guys, or am I crazy?
No, I don't think you're crazy. I mean, I like both those players quite a bit. I mean, like you said, they come with their risks, their injury risks, especially Lonzo after missing, I think it was like 2 years. He's looked. I mean, he also missed a lot of time after coming back with, I think, a wrist injury. So that's separate than obviously like the knee stuff he was going through. But the point I was going to make was that my concern with if trading Rui, if I don't get another, like Lonzo and Bruce are more like they're bigger guards. And like who can play like wing roles in certain spots, but they're just really like bigger guards. If I trade Rui, and if Vando either isn't the Vando of before, or he experiences similar playoff issues as he did a couple of years ago, then my wing / 4 rotation is LeBron, DFS, and the Lonzo or like it starts getting thin if Vando isn't like, and it's going to be. I mean, you said
it's fair. It's fair.
So that's been my concern about trading Rui. I mean, he's also a useful player. I mean, he
is. He's just yeah.
I mean, I think it's funny because I feel like when we first met, like I was lower on Rui than maybe you were, and I feel like we're starting to like do one of these, but that's also where I'm coming from. Like, I just there's a lack of uncertainty. Like, there's just the uncertainty with Vando, and it's tough because, like you said, we're 3 weeks away from the deadline. We're starting to run out of time to gain certainty. And now we're talking about trading for players who have their own injury concerns or injury issues. So it just you're you're making a big bet on Rui. Gabe, I'm a little more. Despite him, his shot making coming around over the past 5-6 weeks, and the defense. I mean, the defense has been at a high level, at least to me, for pretty much the entire season. Like now, he's truly reached to me like he's a two-way guard for this team at this point, and a two-way guard with very low usage. It's just a hard thing to find. But we've talked about. I've been to the trade machine. There are other players out there who I think just add a little bit more playmaking. Still have the shot making and maybe a little bit less, defensive prowess, but I would be okay with that, at least from the guard spot. And maybe, you could have a combination of a Gabe and a Dalton who I worry about his playoff viability or his viability in a playoff rotation. If you can turn those guys into, I told you my fake trade. I'll say it on the show. And maybe this will give an idea. I think it was acquiring Colin Sexton and Walker Kessler, who I know his availability with Utah it can be a lot of smoke and mirrors. How available is he? Mm-hmm. Depends on who you ask. But I think it was a combination of Gabe, Dalton, Jalen Hood-Schifino, and I think Christian Wood. Obviously, you have to throw picks in that trade. To me, you would shore up you're not getting the two-way wing that that this team could use, like any team could use, but that would give you another big and another playmaking guard who looked a little bit more offensive juice in Sexton. Yeah. And you still have your forward / wing rotation between LeBron, DFS, Rui, and you're not. To me, I'm trying to put Vando in the team in a spot where Vando is a luxury, not a necessity. Because I would be concerned about making Vando a necessity for my team for success when he hasn't been right. That's to me, and you won't know that until you know that. And even if he's right, he's still
can always. There's always risk. I guess that's where though for me then. Well, not even, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, even if he's right, there's still the potential playoff limitations that we saw 2 years ago. So that's also there's another added concern. Now, if JJ can unlock Vando offensively in a way that, he wasn't beforehand, TBD. But also recently that the way the offense has gone, I'm a little less optimistic compared to how I was maybe even the start of the season.
I guess I would just argue then that I think Rui has potential playoff limitations that in that 2023 run, there was the Golden State series where it just wasn't really his series and his role was a bit reduced. But then I would look at last year against Denver in the first round, and he had a really rough series. He was missing open threes. He was missing layups. I think he averaged 7 points a game for the series and really struggled with that either Michael Porter Jr. or Aaron Gordon defensive assignment. So I think at least with Vando, there's certainly a lot of risk with the health and just how quickly can he ramp up to being a rotation caliber guy. There's also the risk, as you pointed out, of the offensive end and teams scheming for him to play him off the floor. I just think he has this skill that no matter what is going to bring a baseline level of value and floor that you could argue, I guess, Rui has with his shooting because he has been the Lakers' best shooter this season statistically. But I guess my solution then, if the Lakers keep Rui, I think you almost have to move him to the bench because I think there's just too much defensive. There's too many defensive weak points in that starting lineup, too many entry points into the paint. I look at the combination of Austin, Rui, and LeBron and a disengaged LeBron, not Miami LeBron last night was awesome. That was one of his best defensive games of the season. I thought he was really disruptive. And as you pointed out, on the ball, he can still be pretty good. It's more so help side, low man rotations, boxing out. I thought the San Antonio game, conversely, was one of his worst defensive games of the season. So I don't love that combination together of Austin, LeBron, and Rui. I think it puts so much on Max and AD that I would like to see DFS in there, shift Rui more to a bench role, and lean into his strengths, which is if you're coming off the bench and playing a little bit less, you still have to bring a requisite level of energy and effort and awareness and defense, but it's not as vital because if we judge, and this isn't an exact comparison, but if we judge Rui through like the Dalton lens of when Dalton comes in, it's kind of just like, can Dalton make threes or not? And that's basically how he's judged because we know there's defensive limitations. We know there's rebounding limitations. Teams are going to target him. It's really just, can Dalton make shots, keep the defense honest, and you can keep him out there. I think Rui, it should kind of be similar of, can Rui attack closeouts? Can he make open threes? Can he play with a certain level of physicality and verve? And if so, it's a Rui night. Play him more, potentially close with him. If not, then it's not a Rui night, and I think his minutes need to be reduced. I've brought up some parallels, in my opinion, between Rui and D'Lo in terms of those guys just having such low floors that if you keep them in their normal role and they're having an off night, they can be really harmful to the rotation. And that's where like DFS to me brings a higher floor than Rui. You know what you're getting. He's a 40+% 3-point shooter, knows how to attack closeouts, has played next to star creators before, and is a really good multi-positional defender. Start that guy, play that guy 30+ minutes. And then I think Rui is a little bit more of a situational matchup-based bench player, in my opinion. So I think if they, regardless of which path they go down in terms of keeping him or flipping him for a different player, I think a role switch needs to be in line. Unless he plays like the Miami game for like the rest of the season. But based on the first nearly 40 games, I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah, and I think something I don't want to speak for you, but something I think we're in agreement with, or at least this is where I'm coming from, especially as we talk about, I know JJ said earlier, everyone's a role player. Right. After your stars or your top 2
technically,
or 3, I still really start to... Yes, technically everyone does have a role.
LeBron and AD's roles are be superstars.
Exactly. With that understanding, to me, I put more value on like the non-scoring parts of games from role players, whether it's defense, boxing out, rebounding, deflections, just tenacity. Mm-hmm. And these are things that I just think DFS has an advantage of over Rui. So that understanding, like, I'm with you that it made, like, I think just in theory, the fit of DFS and alongside the starters is just better, regardless of if they add a playmaker or if they add another big man who starts or doesn't start. It's just, I think he just makes more sense. I mean, unless they added another big man who could actually start.
So that was actually what, when you were making the point earlier about like the wing rotation, I think if you do make if you do your trade for Walker Kessler, or you go get a Robert Williams, Jonas Valanciunas, Nikola Vucevic, and you slide AD and LeBron down to the 4 and the 3, all of a sudden it kind of changes the dynamic of your forward. Because now we're potentially looking at AD as like a half forward, half center, and your front court is more center X who's playing 25, 30 plus minutes a night, depending on who it is, maybe 18 to 20, whatever. AD, LeBron, DFS, and then Vando is more of like that fifth guy, and you're relying on him a little bit less than like if he's your fourth guy. Like I think how you slot these guys really matters. So that's a potential like if you do move on from Rui and bring in a big man, you change the dynamic there, but like you can still find a way, I think, to minimize Vando and have him more to your point, like a luxury than a necessity. And that's one potential solution. Especially, I also think like you mentioned Christian Wood earlier, like Christian Wood last year had, like, if he shot the way that he had shot previously in his career, I thought it was statistically one of his better like defensive rebounding and rim protection years. So if you can match that with the shooting of old, that player, I think, and it might be wish, like we don't even know if he's going to play this season, right? So it could be wish casting, but that player I think could have, like, you could use him next to AD or next to another big, and also just kind of just play these giant lineups where you have 2 7-footers on the floor at all times. And I think playing big also helps mask some of the perimeter defensive issues. So we're talking about a theoretical thing here where they change their entire brand of basketball and JJ's philosophy, and I'm skeptical of either one of those two things necessarily happening, but it is interesting to talk about in terms of like, if they are investing more in the two big scenario and they get their bigs back and they go add another big, all of a sudden you actually have like more weapons to utilize. And if you just are constantly playing with, and it's got to be the right bigs, of course, right? But if you can find those right pieces, it gets interesting.
Yeah, and I think, well, the reason that the smile for viewers, I started smiling when you brought up Christian Wood, was because it took me back to like parts of early last season. Like I'm thinking of the Phoenix game where it was LeBron, Christian, and AD front. Like
guarding KD.
Like Christian was guarding KD, like very impressive, and he could guard KD, and then and AD could still be near the rim, and LeBron could, and that also allowed LeBron to not be in fewer help situations. I think that's the other thing that I like about, at least for the regular season. And now the playoffs can obviously be a different story. Your rotation shrinks. You may be playing 7 to 8 guys, like real minutes, as opposed to 8, 9, 10 guys, real minutes. But the other thing I like about playing bigger is that you take, whether it's Rui or LeBron, they're less likely to be in those low man help situations, and they're more likely to be guarding, one-on-one, or I guess be more involved in perimeter actions, which that can go up and down depending on their engagement, but at least they're not the ones at the rim having to make their rotation and protect the paint, or having to be the one who has to make a closeout because there's a skip pass on the weak side. I guess you lessen the necessary involvement in those specific situations. Now, obviously, they would be involved in other scenarios, but that's something that I would like, because I think for them, like their weak side help, low man rotations, engagement, it wanes so much. I would be open to just playing bigger and having them just be in different defensive roles. So I honestly forgot. Like we got on this tangent. We
went off the rails here, but
we went off the rails. There was a point you were making. I completely forgot.
We were just talking about like what needs the team has and what players you'd be interested in. So you propose Kessler, Sexton. I'm for that. I think the guys. I'm going to do a trade target list at some point soon, but the guys near the top of that list are Kessler, Bruce Brown, Lonzo. Sexton, if taking on Sexton is the way you get Kessler, I'm open to that. And I think he could potentially fill that need of a backup guard who you don't like, doesn't have to be in the closing lineup, but can be on certain nights. And even if he's just like a 20 to 25 minute a night backup and helping Austin and LeBron as like the secondary ball handler playmaker, like I think that could have value. But it's hard for them to get all three needs. I guess that's kind of, with the players they can trade and the draft assets they have to pick two of them at most, and really probably one core skill set or player archetype to focus on. Go address that, and then maybe address one of them with like a cheaper player. But it's going to be interesting to see like how they prioritize this.
They just added Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, I understand that he's not like.
Well, I think this is a larger point to like the roster. Like,
I'm not saying that like drags towards you.
I just think the roster still needs work. That's kind of my point.
No, I agree. I just think it's been funny. Like people have been. It's not you specific. This isn't like I'm speaking to. This is for Twitter. This is for Twitter. Like people. Oh my goodness! Again,
such a hot take that the lights went out.
Such a hot take that the lights went off. This is incredible. And it's too dark outside. Wow. All right, I'm gonna make this take in the dark. Oh, never mind. The lights came back on. That was completely off the rails, by the way. They just added Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, it's only been 7 games, and I think he missed one of them. He missed the Miami win, and he's doubtful for the game tomorrow. So, I mean, at a certain point, they haven't really practiced much with him. So I think also
mispractice,
he missed practice. So also some of it is they just need to get a little bit more he needs to get more acclimated, and maybe that involves a role change. Like, I'm open to the idea. I actually like the idea of maybe, if depending on the other moves you make, or maybe even make it before the deadline, depending on how the next couple weeks go, like play like based off the rotations, like DFS has been the one coming in for LeBron as the one of the first subs. Like I would want to see the lineup. I mean, I can't remember how many minutes. I looked it up recently, but how many minutes have Austin, Max, Dorian, LeBron, and AD played alongside one another? It hasn't been many.
I think it's like 16 or some 16, 20. It's pretty low.
Yeah, and so to me, like I try that. Once Dorian's back with the team, play that try to lean into that lineup just a little bit more. Configure the rotation in a way that it allows you to play that lineup a little bit more comfortably, and then you just you can go from there. Like I agree with you that there are multiple holes with this. I think one of the benefits of making that DFS trade and shake trade at the end of December as opposed to right now or
16,
even the end of January.
For the record, sorry to interrupt. For the record, 16 minutes there plus 17 in those 16 minutes.
Really impressive. So do it more. And then maybe if it's looking really good and if this current starting lineup is not producing the way you want, then you make the swap. And then maybe like that could be soon. That could be really soon. And then you still have time to shop. I agree with you though. This team has holes. This team has some needs. But I think they both need another wing. I also think that they can help themselves in terms of how they use their guys. In terms from the wing spot. That's kind of where I'm at with like the wings, like the 3 and 4 spot, like the 1 and 2 or the 2. I mean, that's really Max and that's Max base in Dalton.
Oh, you're saying at the 2 spot? Yeah. And that's kind of where like Bruce Brown. I got like if you did the Bruce Brown trade, it can if it was just Rui plus like matching salary. You could have it be Austin, Gabe, Max, Bruce, Rui, DFS, or whichever order you want to put those two, LeBron, Vando, and then AD and Christian, Jackson, Christian, Trey, whoever you want to put as the backup. So like that, I think it kind of balances out the group. Well, actually, sorry, I said Rui. Rui's off the... So... Okay. I guess now you're putting Dalton or Cam into the projected top 10, and I don't love that. I guess it would be Dalton. Cam just was a DNP CD, but yeah. Again, it's kind of like it's whack-a-mole. Like you can't have everything, and you got to give something up. And I think I'm willing to give up a little bit of, yeah. I guess I'm willing to give a little bit of that wing size with Rui specifically to potentially plug some of the other holes, especially because I just don't think he plays to his size all the time, basically.
No, I feel you. And I guess to plug the trade I propose is that if you do get bigger or if you do add another big, at least that's like the 2-3 spots, like you're going to be playing LeBron more at the 3, DFS more at the 3, Rui more at the 3. And then, like, the 2's really going to be, like, and you'll have Colin Sexton, too. So, like, the 2 spot would really be, like, Austin and Max. Like, that would kind of just be your 2s for the entire, like, across the entire game. Austin and Max. Because then you would have so many front court guys. You really couldn't, I mean, honestly, you could even put, like, you would have, like, bigger lineups where it's a guard and some combination of LeBron, DFS, AD, Walker, Rui, like you're so front loaded. I mean, just name 7 guys, or that's not 7 guys, but 6 guys who could play anywhere between, or a few guys who could play 3, a few guys who could play 4, and like 2 guys who would be playing 4 or 5. So there's also that potential. Even my proposal, I think we still have Jackson on the team, so you would just have a lot of big dudes on the team. But as we've seen, this team's when they play bigger, I guess the data I just showed you about 2 big lineups isn't the best. But I was about to say when they play bigger, they're usually better. But I guess the data doesn't back that up. Limited sample size. That's my excuse. That's sample size.
I think this is a good place to wrap, though. I'm surprised we made it to the end of the pod. It got off the rails a few times, but we got it back. And I think people are going to enjoy this one. Khobi, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
I was gonna say before I plug anything, this episode kind of went like last night for the Lakers, kind of a rocky start, but we picked up in the second half.
We didn't let go of the rope.
Didn't let go of the rope. We grabbed it. We said, we're bringing it back. Plug as of right now. I mean, it's probably like not too long before we got on. I wrote a story about the too big conversation that JJ brought up. I think I've included like a little bit of data from I think even brought up like the last time they used it. So that's mainly it. Can follow me on Twitter. I can't spell my own name. Wow. KHOBI_Price on Twitter/X. You can find my work, LA Daily News, OC Register. Hopefully I can spell my name correctly in my publications. But yeah, I mean, we'll be back at it tomorrow. Lakers Nets, the return of D'Angelo Russell.
That's going to be a fun one. He's going to go for 35.
Someone, I forget who. I don't know if you were there. I forget who asked, but they asked like the over/under field goal attempts. I think they said like 23. I said under.
I'll take under, but I depends how much he plays. Yeah, I can see 16, 17, and he also gets he'll probably get a couple trips to the free throw line. But yeah, it'll be a fun one. We'll see if the Lakers can top the 59-point margin of victory. I doubt it. I think the Nets will somehow have their players, or some of them, at least against the Lakers, but maybe not. Khobi, thank you so much for coming on the show. We will have to make you a 4-time guest very soon, maybe episode 169 if...
All right, close this off.
Before then, thank you all for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Friday night after Lakers Nets. I will talk to you then.